the aim of the session is to dig a little deeper into how the question of how we optimise our existing infrastructure through innovation and new approaches to placemaking, and also that we have think a little bit about what the role of leadership is in that journey. I'm delighted to have an amazing panel of speakers with me today. In the middle, Darryl Murphy is Managing Director of Infrastructure at Aviva Investors, and Darryl is responsible for a portfolio of around 11 billion of debt and equity investments across the UK and Europe. I'm also really pleased to say that Aviva Investors are one of our summit sponsors, so thank you very much for that. As well as coming to speak. Next to me, Chris Boardman, you're the National Active Travel Commissioner. You lead the work of the Active Travel England, and before that, Chris, you were the Transport Commissioner for Greater Manchester and the first ever Greater Manchester Cycling and Walking Commissioner. And I just have to also mention that you are a former professional cyclist who won a
when it was black and white a long time ago.
a gold medal in individual pursuit at the 1992 Barcelona Olympic Games. And then also... I had a fan, I'm a cyclist, had a fan moment this morning. I'm sure there'll be lots of fan moments if you are willing to stay with us for the most of the morning. Nick, who I can't see very well, is Global Chair of the International Project Finance Association, which comprises of more than 600 member organisations from across the world of infrastructure, was previously Chief Business Advisor and Director General for Enterprise at the UK Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And most important to me, on a very selfish level, is also a wonderful board member at the Connected Places Catapult. So massive welcome to you this morning too. I just wanted to start with a question for all of you, if I may. And it's when you think about national infrastructure, or when we think about national infrastructure at the Catapult, we focus on infrastructure optimisation. And we're thinking about how we can use technologies and digital solutions to optimise what's already there. How do you see the role of technology and innovation in the UK's national infrastructure landscape? Chris, can I start with you?
Yeah, I mean, I ran an R&D department for a decade, and the one thing we learned is don't innovate unless you have to, because it involves risk, it's doing things differently. So first of all, the innovation might be, what have I already got that I can leverage, that I can do more with? And I mean, the connected thing for me, and reusing using the assets you already have at your disposal more effectively, active travel sits quite a long way down the list in people's thinking. Regionally, I think there's about 2.2 billion of elective spending is actually going into active travel, because it is how you make public transport work. So using simple things that we see outside of this building, the amount of people getting around under their own steam that we saw. Imagine if they were doing that by mechanised transport. That would be some chaos. So we've looked at it and realised that you expand the catchment for public transport tenfold if you have an effective active travel network. And then you start to look at, I'll stop in a minute. No. If you look at simple things like the school run, if you unshackle parents from having to do the school run because the kids are safe enough to do it, then you can go from a 2-car or a 3-car household to a 2-car or a 1-car household. Suddenly you're impacting your wider decarbonisation aims with something that brings benefits. So it's the connected bit for me is where the exciting bit of innovation is, and it's affordable for all of us.
Yeah, I think that that's really sensible, and I've noticed the evolution of the school run actually recently as we've started to use electric bikes. So when I'm cycling in the morning, where it used to be people walking their children to school, quite often now people can get a little bit further and put them on an electric bike and get them a little bit further in. So I think that's all really good. Darryl.
Well, thank you. And I've, I guess, a series of cliches I'd like to bring out. Well, one of my favourite ones is, from an infrastructure investor point of view, is you know, the infrastructure we've been investing over the last sort of 20, 30 years is not going to be the same for the next 20 years. So it's kind of exciting times. What does that mean practically? You know, I've been brought up in an era of big infrastructure, quite civil engineering focused, about building big things, whether it be power stations to even schools, hospitals, through PPP, through to renewable generation. But if we focus looking ahead, and perhaps the theme we'll pick up on, is the message to us as today from government is, you know, broadly speaking, you know, what I call tax-funded infrastructure, public transport, very heavily. The government's saying, well, we've got that covered. That's public investments. So private capital needs to be directed to, very broadly, pathway to net zero and digital. If you think about, just for us, the rise of digital infrastructure has been something that has rapidly developed. So even when I say digital, I mean still relatively big things, whether that be fiber infrastructure, data centers, you know, towers, very, very well established. But you're seeing this change in what we think of infrastructure. And obviously we'll get into, if you look at net zero, we're now talking about technologies that are in many cases early stage or may have not been fully developed. So technology, I will say, to a lot of investors is not our favorite thing in terms of being quite boring, conservative, and one of the things that are proven. But somehow we have to sort of find the bridge to go from the new to established.
Yeah, sort of backwards thinking in a different kind of way. Nick?
I'll pick up very quickly on the word landscape and the word optimisation. The infrastructure landscape has changed profoundly in recent years as a result of innovation. And like Darryl, for me, that's very exciting. The world of infrastructure is becoming much more forward-focused, much more on how do we solve the problem of the 2050s. It was not so long ago much more rooted in the past. So the big themes of the industry are energy transition and the future of mobility. Darryl alluded to the fact that the sector has broadened as well. So digital is now a standalone sector in its own right. Fiber, data centers, Darryl listed them. Infrastructure is becoming much more flexible, much less rigid as a result of innovation. So infrastructure has always been about predictability. That's what investors have always liked. The next stage of market maturity for infrastructure is coping with uncertain pathways into the future. At the same time, infrastructure is becoming more distributed, so less about top-down systems imposed by experts, more about you and I taking control of our infrastructure decisions, our relationship with infrastructure. And data helps with that. The school run is a good example we could go into there. And infrastructure is becoming more political as well globally, but I won't get into that right now. All told, innovation is making infrastructure a lot more interesting. I remember a time when the BBC transport correspondent said to me, infrastructure will only make the evening news for 30 seconds on the quietest day in August. And now I turn on the news and it's a quiet day if infrastructure isn't in the news. Optimisation, 2 points to make very quickly. One is that implies it's all about maximising efficiency. It's not. The future of infrastructure is all about sustainability and resilience as well. So it's about trade-offs between optimizing efficiency while building in buffers for different future pathways. And then how technology is helping, gosh, that's a big topic. Shifting the infrastructure landscape by 2050 is the biggest investment program in human history, and the single biggest thing we can do is use the existing infrastructure we have more efficiently, prolong its life, reduce costs, get more out of it. And that's a combination of digital technology, sector-based technology working together, but it's also about innovation, social innovation, and innovation in the way we do things like procurement and policy and finance and so on.
So a lot of things to think about doing slightly differently.
Yes.
I'm going to come back because we've just talked a little bit about how we have to interact with infrastructure and how actually by becoming more complex, we're bigger players in that sort of interaction. We've got more choices perhaps to make. And coming back to you, Chris, I think on the active travel point, why is active travel, do you think, such an important part of the infrastructure of a truly connected place? I'm not just thinking health and social benefits, but also the growing market opportunities for business and innovators?
Well, I think for me, I'd start much further back and think, what are the biggest headaches and threats that we're facing at the moment? And in the immediate future, we've obviously got cost of living, we've got dependence on fossil fuels. On the street, I think we've got congestion. We've got 1.5 billion journeys every year being driven that are 1 mile or less. So when I worked in Greater Manchester, there's 250 million car journeys a year of less than 1 kilometre. And at the same time paying 2.5 million a month to treat inactivity-related illness. So you start to look at the wider benefits of each of your investments and think, how many of these can I tick? So if we build health into streets, then we solve some of those problems. If we can make sure that that is also carbon-free transport, then we solve another one. If we make it affordable transport, then we've solved another one. We give our children transport independence, which I think most parents would want, then we've solved another one. So I just go for the simplest solution, which is kind of why I ended up in this seat. So I think what's the size of the prize? I think Sir John said earlier, what's the size? And that's really important. If you're going to do difficult, there has to be a ratio of really difficult, big prize, and where do you sit on that? So our job is to get 50% of journeys cycled or walked by 2030. And I asked the team, what does that mean? And they sort of sighed and went away and came back 2 days later and said, it's 3 billion more active journeys. And I said, okay, what does that mean? And they went, oh. Came back another few days, it's 3.36 million more active people. But it's also 2 million fewer GP visits. It is, 3.5 million. It's 2 million fewer sick days. And then you start to realise the benefit that you embed. And as I mentioned, you make public transport sustainable by increasing its catchment. So I look at it in terms of that's the kind of innovation, that efficiency, and it also makes nicer places to live. So it's a sort of a Steve Jobs approach, really, of start with the customer, what's their journey, what do they want, and what would give them that, and work backwards. And I think that's a sensible approach to life.
Yeah, we talked a lot yesterday about putting the community at the centre of the choices that we're making around connection, and transport obviously really, really key to that. Darryl, when it comes to creating new investment models for financing the infrastructure of the future, what are the ingredients of success that place leaders need to know about?
Yeah, so at the risk of bringing out another cliche, one of my favourite sort of things I'll just touch on here is, which when I was hearing me speak, I talk a lot about, which is the sort of the fundamentals of this, because there's nothing magic in investment, right? Just to sort of debunk any views of what we do is particularly clever. The reality is, it is the difference between funding and financing. I have a lot of capital to deploy. It surprises a lot of people when I say it's difficult to find opportunities to deploy that capital in the UK today in infrastructure more broadly. And to be fair, we'll come on to this maybe a little bit later, which is it the wrong capital for the right projects or the right capital for the wrong projects? We'll have to figure out. But the important thing is, obviously, the point for us, if you want private capital, sadly, is our number one focus on our client outcomes is return, and you do need a revenue stream. And that is the key part about the funding challenges. So for that end, there are different models that the UK has been very good at developing. I hate to bring up again, but not everyone's cup of tea, which is sort of PFI, PPP. It had a purpose, and it had a revenue stream that was allocated with risk transfer. That developed further. We look at renewable energy. It has various subsidy regimes, the contract for difference approach, etc. We've seen a very successful model in terms of regulated asset base used for utilities. These are all means by which you can aggregate revenue, primarily from consumers. The big challenge comes back to that point around how do you capture that sort of tax-funded revenue. But when we're looking at something, we've now just touched on the two bigger issues for us in any investment. What is the sort of particularly development, technology risk we spoke to, and fundamentally, how are you getting that money back? I've said to many local authorities, you can have as much money as you like. The problem is I do need it back with some level of return. So the question is where that is coming from. So again, we have to keep innovating. I think in financial terms, it is possible, and we've done it in the past. So you have to just keep using those models and enhancing them further.
That sounds great. I'm just going to give a plug for Slido for people in the audience. I think I've got some questions coming through already, but if you've got any questions, I'm just going to ask Nick one last question, but then we're going to turn to Slido questions, so do keep bringing them in. Nick, in all of this, what do you think that this means for those larger connectivity projects like ports, airports and critical rail infrastructure, especially when we think about the government's ambition to level up the economy right across the UK?
I lived and breathed this for the period when I was Chief Business Advisor, and my job was to engage with 6 million businesses around the UK, and so I made it my business to spend every day outside SW1 travelling around the UK and engaging with businesses. The undoubted high point of every day was seeing local innovation and local innovation clusters and all the incredible things that are happening. The undoubted low point of every day was getting to and from those places. So that rammed home to me that absolutely connectivity is critical to levelling up. I remember once doing a 3-hour business roundtable where, despite my best efforts, I couldn't get anyone off the topic of infrastructure. So it's important, but I think there's an opportunity in turning those low points into high points. To actually, it strikes me, going through railway stations and airports, I never lingered there, never had meetings there unless it was with the operator. There's actually an opportunity to turn these places into living labs, hubs of innovation, where you can showcase what's happening in automation and sustainability and digitalisation. And we should be celebrating these places, not just passing through them. We do have examples. My wife was chuffed to see her last meeting of today is at King's Cross. And she said, that's great, easy to get to and a fun place to be. So there are examples like that, and at a much more local level, the town where I live, which has a heritage based in connectivity and a current economy based around logistics and forwarding. I spent the weekend around the local canals that have been redeveloped as a hub for leisure and hospitality. There's exciting things happening. The railway stations being made more accessible to pedestrians and cyclists and public transport. And just up the road in Coventry, first vertiport and drone hub being so maybe we'll be celebrating advanced air mobility at some point in the future as well.
Yeah, I think, I mean, King's Cross is just such a great example of public-private community collaboration to make something that was perhaps somewhere, when I first arrived in London far too many years ago, not a very nice place to be, into somewhere that you really want to go and spend time. I think that's really brilliant. Yeah,
just one quick point, Eric. Just the segue, which is very relevant when we talk about railway stations, is the intersection. We just talked about funding. One of the areas, so John mentioned him briefly, which was land value capture. And one of the areas that we've still struggled a bit, I think even wearing infrastructure hat, given I work within a real assets group where we do real estate and infrastructure, the nexus of those two still offers a lot more. If you think about the ability to combine a railway station, is a great example, where you can have the infrastructure very clearly and look at the retail and other opportunities around it. You know, we're probably not doing enough around that. So actually that nexus for us is more and more. And that's the heart also when we invest in real estate, to look at from the place mentality. So I think never before we've had infrastructure and real estate so overlapping, which is an important opportunity, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I'm actually going to come to you, Darryl, with a really great question that's come up. Thinking about what you were talking about in terms of finance, a really strong question that I'm sure everybody's really interested in is, how do we help place leaders make the case for public infrastructure investment at this time of ongoing fiscal pressure? Yeah,
well, I think, how do you reckon that case? In terms of, from a public investment, the answer is more a public investment. There's a fundamental point for me, which is, it's going back a step actually to what was driving a lot of infrastructure, certainly, you know, for Nick and I remember, which was driving around economic development being first and foremost. I mean, that is at the heart of it. It's the business case for those investments are very clear. It's easy for me to speak as a private investor to say, I just need to see simply a cash flow, and it's the idea of where revenue is. I can't monetize the broader social and economic benefits. For any local authority, that's inherent in any investment they make. So the richness in a business case for investment, Chris, you mentioned it already, which is it's not purely economic, but economic development and the broader benefits that encompasses. And I'm a big fan of actually what we've not done very well is how you bring those two models together. There is a way in which you can combine separately, but economic investments to support more socio-economic best investments at a local level. And I think we just have to get better at really articulating that case.
Yeah.
Can I just hop in on it with a
Yes,
perspective on that? 3CI is, such as been mentioned already today, is such a great example of how to make the case. Having done this in the public sector and the private sector, the best way to make the case in the public sector is you can get the private sector interested, and the best way to get the private sector interested is through an example like 3CI. If one place decided to try and get the concept of net zero neighbourhoods off the ground, it would exhaust its resources and capability trying to do that and wouldn't attract the attention of global investors because it's a one-off deal. So back to Darryl's point about build a scalable, replicable pipeline of deals and the private sector will come, is critically important, because you get that scale, you mobilise interest, you get the expertise in the room, you have the ability to run demonstrators, and so on. Just one other point on the future of finance as well is, as infrastructure has to become more flexible, less rigid, the traditional world of project finance has to engage more with the world of venture capital, and there's moves afoot around that we could get into. But
yeah. I think we've been talking a lot over the past couple of days. I'm sure we'll talk about it more today, about how we need to create those examples. And I think the thing that has been coming through to me is it's very easy to wait until you've almost completely de-risked. You really think it's going to work. And I think there's been a real call in the people that I've been listening to actually try some things, fail, understand, record, learn, try again, and then create that kind of pipeline that then will take us to a different place where we actually can work together. We know how to work together. I think we've got to give it a go, I think is what I'm hearing. There is a question here for Chris, actually, which is about the UK cycling industry. At a time when many retailers are closing, how do you keep active travel agendas momentum up?
Well, I think it's I mean, talking back to some of the points at the start, I think people are inevitably ending up at the same conclusion, because even if it's not an activity that's for you, or it doesn't appeal, you realise that actually it's my least worst option. So working regionally, it was fascinating listening to that conversation. I think devolution is the potential to create that scalability that you were talking about, to make a investment a really attractive proposition. And land value as well. We looked at the HS2 site in Manchester when that was a thing, but it was all good to work because of what was around. And I'll double back to that in a moment. I think one of the things I learned with, say, the tram network was it actually carried really about 2% of the journeys in the region. But everybody wanted a tram. And the value of the tram system is £3.6 billion, carrying just 2% of the journeys. But it was certainty. It was a commitment to a space, and then everybody could invest around that space because we knew it was going to be there. And there was a point Sir John made earlier about that: have a plan and stick to it, so everybody else can then do their thing and evolve around. So coming back in a circular route to the question you asked, active travel is, I mean, it's just walking, and cycling is just lazy walking. That is how it's been used in other countries. 212 miles from here, you don't have a sea of cyclists. You just have people getting around in the easiest possible way. 70% of young people make all their journeys in that way. So you come back around to, and it's happening in pockets all over the world, that this is just the cheapest, best return investment that there is, and it's foundational for all the other things. And I don't think we have a product problem. We talk about the facts and everybody gets it. We have a marketing problem, that it's just not sticking, that this is a big part of your solution. So I think we're going to get there, but it's going to be a slow and circuitous route. We sold everybody and I'm in the cycling industry as well, so we sold everybody 4 years worth of bikes in 1 year during COVID, and that was great. And then we ran straight into a cost of living. So there's certainly a dip in the market, but it's there and it's consistent, and it's one of the few future investments that is going to be absolutely certain.
One of the things that I think about as a cyclist, which I think has actually been helped by the way that we've changed the way that we work and the way that we dress when we get to work, is that when I first started cycling in London 30 years ago, I used to get to the office and change, and now I just come like this. And I think if we can it is that marketing thing, isn't it? Anybody can do this. This is just something that you can do in your normal clothes. You can arrive, you can carry your panniers around. Nobody's going to.
But that was a 10-year investment in infrastructure that has allowed that to happen, and you've now got a sustained 26% uplift on pre-COVID levels because of that investment. No, it's very different. Nick.
Can I just jump in with my highlighter pen and expand the point beyond the lazy walking industry to all businesses? The way to create opportunities for more businesses is to underline the point that John made, is just to have a clear, consistent plan that you can collaborate around and you stick to. And that's so important. It enables you to have a talk about what are the big challenges we're all trying to face, whether that's net zero or AI or the future mobility. It allows meaningful collaboration between government and business, centre and regional, big business and small business, bringing academia, that as a country we're not very good at because we don't have a plan to collaborate around. It enables a structured conversation around things like skills and business support and so on. A national plan built on collaboration can form the basis of local conversations that then gets a sustained dialogue going. And then you find yourself sticking to it and having a sort of global perspective on things. I could rattle off the list of countries that do have plans and stick to them. And we have had a plan. I suspect we'll have another plan next year. And it's good to have a plan, but having something that survived more than one parliament would be a major innovation.
And that's where
innovation.
You may get a round of applause for that.
I was going to say earlier when you were talking about fan moments for Chris, I was like, I'm not going to.
And that's where the role of organisations like us, I think, can come in terms of sticking to a plan, having a plan, sticking to a plan.
You identify the challenges, you convene people around, you work through the problems methodically, and you stick with it. Yes.
I've got one last question because it's a great one that's come on Slido. Yesterday, Lord Peter Hendy said to us that the UK invented the railway 200 years ago. I'm going to ask all of you to just have a little bit of a think about what we should invent next. Nick, you look like you're going to answer first.
Well, that's because I'm feeling smug, because I think I already alluded to one earlier, so I'm just going to repeat the same point. But I think the idea that the Catapult is promoting of taking major transport hubs and turning them into not just places you pass through, but places you stay and celebrate, where you can see innovation in action, because we all pass through these places, I think is something that, well, is happening in other parts of the world, but we could make our own.
Darryl.
Contrarian, I don't think we need the big magic bullet invention-wise. I think you can see. I don't know where Chris is on this, bigger topic for another time, which was around the stick and carrot. If I look at road user charging as a topic, right? If you start to look at that, but also how, it's a good example in my mind that that's quite a clunky thing to bring in. If you put technology into that, and I remember Nick and I looking at this a long time ago, where you've got a smart way of having differential charging, taking into account the fact that you don't make it necessarily regressive tax. The technology that you bring to that, and that I'm leaping a little bit on the AI bandwagon, but that's really what can make a difference. By using technology to take infrastructure, which can be quite clunky and old-fashioned, to make it more forward-looking, and therefore you're solving a number of problems in one go.
Yep.
So it's not the big bang, it's more about what that technology enablement can do.
Amazing, Chris.
I'll leave it with that. That was very well
what
framed. I'll
technology can do. That's a brilliant way for us to finish up. So thank you so much. If you can join me in thanking my panel members.
Good. Very good.